back to Keep It at 99, the most edifying podcast in the world. And I'm joined here today with Mr. Labib Mahfouz. Thank you, Mr. Labib, for coming onto the podcast.
Of course, just Labib.
Okay. So before we get started, just like to get to know you a little bit more. So give us a quick bio about who you are, what you do. Go
ahead. My name is Labib Mahfouz, and I currently serve in St. Mary and St. Athanasius Coptic Church in Hillsborough, New Jersey. It's probably been around 15-ish years there. If we go all the way back, I was born in Chicago. My parents came to America in the 60s, and I was born in Chicago. And then we traveled a lot as a family. Lived in Chicago, then in Cairo, then in Paris, then in London, then in New York, then in Bahrain. And then we moved back to New York. Or I moved back for university, and then after university, I worked for a bank in the investment management world. Moved to London after that, and then moved back to New York. I am married with 3 children. You know them. So I would say that the consistent theme across the board, regardless of whether it was my life with my family as a child or as a young adult and traveling for work, has definitely been my involvement, my family's involvement in the Coptic Church. And I think identity-wise, if you're going to ask me what do I identify most as, I identify as a Copt.
So you talked about identity there right at the end. I think that segues perfectly into our topic, which is about the struggles of youth. You serve high school youth or college, or used to serve high school?
High school, college, young adults.
So that age group.
It's kind of been consistent all the way through.
Yeah. And so obviously there's a lot of struggles that they go through, so we'll talk a little bit about that. So the first one that I wanted to talk about, which you brought up perfectly, is identity. We have an identity crisis in this country, regardless of what walk of life or what worldview you have. People are struggling to find out who they are. They don't really know how to figure that out and all that. So I would like to get your thoughts on why do you think there's an identity crisis, and then we'll go from there.
I think the struggle of finding out who you are is not unique. And so, I think that it's a consistent theme in history, right? If you read a lot of history books or great people in ancient history, it was always trying to figure out who they are and how do they succeed. And so nothing's changed. I really feel across the board, whether it's temptations or sin or identity or just all the issues that we have today are issues we've always had. And I think the struggle has been how they are addressed and possibly how they're ignored. And where we are finding our sources to determine who we are. One of the things, let's say from my own life, is when I really kind of, self-awareness was when I had moved to London as an adult and working, and for me, it was very clear that where I identified was with my church friends and my church service, and that's who I was. That wasn't something that came from the outside. It was internal, and I think when we try to figure out who we are, we look to the outside and see who can I compare myself with, or who do I want to be like. And we are bombarded with so much information in so many formats, so many media types. So it's not like billboards or newspaper or magazine anymore. It's everything, right? It's whether it's before it was just Facebook, right? Now it's hardly Facebook. Now it's Instagram and TikTok and a slew of other kind of applications, and that becomes my source of trying to discover who I am. Who do I want to be like? I think reading is completely underutilized and underestimated. Looking at, to tell someone to to try to compare themselves to a saint is borderline a ridiculous question. Something to bring up. Like, who in Christian history would you want to identify with? That would be ridiculous to even suggest that as an option. I think we're massively more materialistic than we've ever been, because we're exposed to a lot. This isn't a youth issue either. I mean, this is an adult issue. This is an elementary school issue, right? Where your role models change massively, right? And so while, I don't know, in the past you may have asked, write an article about your favorite person, and people would write about, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King or George Washington. That's not who they'd write about today. Those aren't the role models. That level of moral standard and you'll cut out pauses, right? Do you cut out pauses? That level of moral standard and integrity isn't really, it's not a consideration. It's not like it's negated. It's just not a consideration. You look at other things, cool hairstyle, cool dress, cool number of followers, number of likes. Those are the things that are stimulating, and those are the things that people are striving for. So I think people are looking into their identity, I think, in just different places, and those places can get really dark really quick.
You talked about a lot of things there, and I think, the first thing that you mentioned was almost like the standard of which we compare ourselves to. And I think, a lot of, like you said, to say, oh, like, what saint would you identify yourself with, or what great person would you want to be like? A lot of times, like you said, people have kind of lost that touch with that reality, and they've kind of moved themselves into, okay, let me compare myself to everyone around me, or everyone who isn't around me, whether it's fake or real or whatever. And like you said, I think the issue that comes with that is that the standard now, there's not like a goal, there's not like a rule, there's not like a, there's not if you're here in comparison to this person, like, this is where you are, this is the steps you need to take. It's not a good type of comparison.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's not, I was talking about maybe people in media, but you're right. I mean, it could be the person sitting right next to you.
Yeah.
It could be a classmate when you're in high school or middle school, right? It could be like, that's your world, and you don't really look outside your world. And so if you are less popular, look, being popular was always there. Like, there was never, people always cared about it. But again, like I was saying originally, those issues have been bombarding, humankind for generations and for thousands of years. Being popular isn't new, for example, but the methods that's now attacking society today is very different. I mean, I would compare it to, like, perhaps, even when I was growing up, it may have started to become being attacked from all angles, but it was very much like bow and arrow, face-to-face combat, right? That's not the case anymore.
No.
Now you are being attacked from, like, take it from bow and arrow to machine gun, aerial, surveillance from behind, from the top, from in front of you, from the side. You're attacked from everywhere. And so that can create a tremendous amount of anxiety and stress. Again, youth or adults for that matter, you're attacked from all angles. And I think that's something that is slowly deteriorating kind of how we operate.
I wouldn't even say slowly.
Quickly deteriorating.
I think it's fair point. It's pretty quick, especially with.
That's been quick.
Especially if you look, I know I'm the beginning of Gen Z. I was born in 2005, so you look at one side, the millennials, and you look at the other side, the kids who are growing up now. I like to call them the iPad generation. Like, you can tell, you can literally see the differences in the people. You can tell that media, social media, or just being in front of a screen all day or whatever it is, has really disconnected humanity at such a deeper level from God. I don't even think it's like it used to be. someone would disconnect from God, there would be a genuine reason. They'd have a theological issue. They'd have something that happened in their life, that something of importance that if you asked them, they could at least talk about it. They could at least bring it up. They could at least bring it to your attention. Whereas now, when you ask people about, why they left the church or stuff like that, the reasons become less. Obviously, there's still people who have real reasons, but for the majority, the reasons either become less intense or there's even no reason at all.
So let's so there've been huge benefits, obviously, with
Of
technology,
course, yeah, of
right?
course.
And so, and probably one of the biggest benefits is the passing of information and knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and people have access to, or individuals have access to, so much information. And let's not worry about fake news and real information. Let's just assume all information was real, just for a tenth of a second. There's so much access to this information that you begin believing your own press, that you're pretty amazing in the knowledge that you have. Like, so I was recently listening to in a church meeting about some Christology issues, and I was fascinated by the 20-somethings that were commenting on so-and-so wrote this in the 4th century, and this person wrote this, and this commentary about this. And the level of knowledge was really phenomenal. And that if I took that meeting, which was a Zoom meeting, but let's assume, 30 years ago or 40 years ago, that meeting would have been an in-person meeting in a church basement somewhere. No one would really have any idea. We would talk about maybe the same subject, but
Not to the same depth.
no, not at all. And so that's incredible. That's really, and that's across not just religious subjects or theological, but any subject matter, for that matter, right? Math, history, engineering, whatever the subject. But I think because of that, people start believing in their own abilities, as opposed to the gifts that we are given and utilizing those gifts. I mean, I would think of it as like, when you look at the miracle in Cana, at the wedding of Cana, and so they bring in these jars, right, big jars full of water, and Jesus turns them into wine. It's as ridiculous as the jars taking credit for the miracle, because they're the ones that house the water, right? And so we're the jars, and we're housing the gifts that we're given, and so we take credit for it. So my gift in either being able to speak, or my gift in knowledge, or my gift in remembering, or understanding, or reading, whatever my gifts are, and when I utilize those gifts for my own benefit, which is given to us, like God wants us to benefit from the things He gives us, and then I give myself credit for it. So I start believing in how great I am. And I would label it as ridiculous as the jars taking credit for a miracle. They were just a structure that housed a mechanism for Christ to manifest Himself. And I think that's our job. We're jars with a massive amount of capability and massive amount of talent that God wants us to kind of utilize to glorify Him.
And not only are we jars, but we are broken jars, like St. Peter says in his epistle. That, like, it would be even, like you said, like the jars, like they only hold the structure. Even the structure is held together by God.
Yeah,
it has nothing to do with us. So I think, obviously, it takes an immense amount of humility. And like you said, like, when you start to have this, larger amount of knowledge because of the larger access that you have to knowledge, you start to believe in your own ability. And it's hard to separate, like you said, that from just knowing that that's a gift that God has given.
Right, exactly. There's one of my favorite Synaxarium stories. It really is. It'll come to me when it's read, but it was the time of Pope Carlos III, and there was in the middle of the day, the sun slowly disappeared, and it became dark, and crickets started, cricketing, and the stars started kind of appearing in the sky, and the people were in a complete amazement as to what was going on. And the first thing they did was pray to God. What is going on? It's the middle of the day, and it's now turning into nighttime. And they prayed to God, and then soon after their prayer, the sun began to reappear. And so we're going to read that story and chuckle and laugh and go, well, it was just an eclipse, and give ourselves this, pat on the back because we know what it was. And so maybe look at those the people way back then, and think of them as naive, stupid, whatever you want to call it. But what fascinates me about that story is that when there was an element of something you didn't understand, the first thing they did was they went to God. We don't do that. The second we were confronted with a situation that we don't understand, we Google it. We go to ChatGPT. We do whatever, but what we don't do is go to God. And I think that's, again, believing in our own knowledge, right? Taking the things, and I think that's the beauty of the simplicity of an earlier world where there were things I understood and the things I didn't understand. And when I don't understand something, I do go to God. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't Google things and you shouldn't look into things and research and use our abilities, right? We have tools that God gave us. But I think we depend on ourselves a tremendous amount, and taking a step back, and so and going to prayer, I think has kind of been certainly out of fashion. But I love that story. I love reading it. It's in Beba. It's in the month of Beba. I don't remember when. But we could look that up. And but I love it. I just absolutely love the story because it's a moment of weakness and how people react in that moment of weakness.
I really like the point you said right at the end where, how people act in a moment of weakness. And I think a lot of times we try it, like, especially with youth, I know myself included, when we feel weak, the hardest thing to do is to admit that there is weakness. Mm-hmm. And then when you finally get to that point where you admit weakness, it's almost like the world just like, it becomes really scary to deal with. You don't want to go to anyone. You kind of want to keep to yourself. You want to just use the information you have and move on. But I like the story where it's almost like they put the lens on that, we are nothing and God is everything. And I think that it ties back to identity a lot, which is that when we lose sight of who God is in perspective, or who we are in perspective of who God is, that's when our identity becomes, a confusing or a difficult topic to deal with, because we lose that lens, we lose that worldview, that perspective on it's okay for us to be nothing. It's okay for us to, admit that we don't have everything together, that we don't know everything, and that it's only God who is able to do that. It's okay for us to do that. But I feel like the world and the way how media portrays, and even how school is done and the processes that are involved, it's so dependent on the fact that we have to know everything.
There was I was having a conversation one time, long time ago, in a car, and it was a long car ride, and it was a young priest, and he said to me, Labib, everyone is broken. But everyone's always been broken, right? And so I think that the issue in the moment of weakness is that we think we're the only ones, right? Because, this person, showed these pictures on vacation, or this person has this huge smile on their face, or this person has their stuff all put together, right? And you see it in marriages, right? Oh, look at that! Look at this beautiful like family picture, and great Christmas card, or whatever it is. And so you think, well, why is everyone else in such an amazing place and I'm not? And I think what we have to realize 100%, is that everyone in some way is broken. And you're not you're not this like individual on your own and everyone else has got it all together and you don't. Everyone is broken somewhere, somehow, and is dealing with it. And so you're not alone. So that's number one. Number two, you're not alone because you have whatever network you've got that lifts you up. You also have the church to lift you up. You have God to lift you up. And so I think when you go back to that, you realize that I've got a lot more going for me than I actually realize.
Yeah, I think that, again, like you said at the end there, that it's all about the perspective. It's all about what's the mindset that I put on, what's the hat that I put on, that allows me to either, realize that, no, I live in a world of blessings. I live in that world of, where there are things versus not. And I think to tie back into the identity thing, I think it also has to do with thankfulness. So what I would say, like for identity, the two things that helped me the most were humility and thankfulness. Realizing that it's okay for me not to have everything, and then being thankful for the things that I do have, and being thankful for every single little thing that God has put in my life. Because if you're thankful for that, and you understand that it's God who gave it to you, then your identity intrinsically becomes attached to that reality that, God is everything, who is everything, and I'm nothing. So I think with the identity subject, it's obviously very hard to put into reality or to put into motion that, to realize that you don't have to be tied to anything in this world. You don't have to.
And you don't have to be everything. I mean,
no, you don't.
I mean, the beauty of looking at in history, right? And so whether it's church history, biblical history, world history, there are so many characters, right, that have so many personalities, and so many walks of life that you will find someone that's just like you. You will, and you will be able to see how they, work through their life, and be able to kind of grow from that. I mean, the Bible is a rich source of characters that you could look at, or just history in itself. Like you don't have to, church history, biblical history, and like I said, world history. We all like to think we're unique, but human nature is human nature. And so,
the point you made there about uniqueness, I think, moves into a little bit more what I want to talk about in a second, which is about self-image and about reputation. I think a lot of time, and this ties to identity a little bit, but I think a lot of times as youth, we struggle with, do we care about our self-image? Do we not care about our self-image? What are things we care about in reputation? What's important in reputation? And all these things. So as someone who has served youth for a long time, what would you say are important aspects of self-image that as youth we need to keep intact, we need to keep in our reputation, things that we need to, actually care about versus things that maybe we shouldn't care about what some people say about these certain things?
Wow, that opens up a kind of whole series of commentary. As a parent, right, and as a youth leader, let's say, for example, we want our children to be confident, right? We don't want them to be insecure. But sometimes in our quest for that, our children, not necessarily our biological children, but just let's say the youth, they'll move confidence into arrogance, and you can't cross that line. And so, how do you teach confidence, but not arrogance, right? And I think the only way to get there, confidence with humility. And the only way to get there is that your confidence comes from the inside, not from the outside, number one. And that you're confident in your walking in a faithful path. And so if you're doing that, reputation's interesting because there are people that may say, don't do X, Y, and Z because you'll have a bad reputation, right? And or be careful of what you do because of your reputation. I've been a big advocate of trying to be, exercising wisdom in the things I do and the things I say, but doing something solely for reputation, I think is a path where you absolutely lose all sense of identity. That you actually have no identity any longer.
Yeah.
You have no person. You don't have anything.
Yeah.
Because all you are is a function of the environment that you're in at the moment and your reputation in that environment.
Yeah.
So you need to anchor yourself to a North Star. And what is that North Star? And what is your focus there? And how are you going? And regardless of where you are, keeping that, right? And so reputation, whatever it is, positive or negative, positive we hope, will follow that. But you need to anchor yourself to something, to a principle, and then just walk. Joseph, right? He anchored himself, right, to following God. He was at his master's house. His master's wife accused him of misconduct, and I would say he had a pretty bad reputation, right? And then was sent to jail. I'm sure Joseph cared a lot, right, that he was in jail. I'm sure, but I wonder if he really cared about his reputation. He knew what was right, he knew what was wrong, and he walked his path. And reputation didn't matter to him. He was in jail, he walked his path, and look, amongst the people in jail, he had the greatest reputation. Right? So outside of the jail, he had a terrible reputation because of what his master Potiphar's wife accused him of. But in the jail, he was considered the most honorable person. And then inevitably, the truth comes out, and who you really are shines. Reputation is so short term. So short term.
I like what you said about how following your reputation means you have nothing. You have no backbone. You have nothing.
I think you lose a sense of self. Now, I'm not saying that that you should never consider it. Of course you should,
yeah.
Right? But
you shouldn't base your actions off of it.
You should, exactly.
Yeah. Because it reminds me of the verse, which is, you can't have two masters. You either choose God or you choose, it says mammon. And it also reminds me of, the fact that you either, if you're trying to please God, you won't please men. If you try to please men, you can't please God. You can't pick both. You can't pick both worlds. You have to pick something. And like you said, I really like the fact that you use the story of Joseph, because it's something my dad always does when we talk about this subject, talk about self-image, reputation, because you're right. You have to fixate on Christ. You fixate on God, and you don't waver from that. If something bad happens, something bad happens. Something good happens, something good happens. But at the end of the day, you know that you are struggling in the path of righteousness. And it's just like what St. Paul says, fight the good fight, finish the race. I think with reputation and with self-image, the world, in terms of ideologies, is very pendulum-like. So it goes from one extreme to the other extreme. And I think at some point there was an extreme within the last 20 years of, YOLO, don't care about what anyone has to say, you only live once, all this stuff. And very quickly, that pendulum swung to the opposite side and got to the same extreme on the other side, which is, you have to be 100% of your self-image. You have to take care of your self-image. You have to, shield yourself, keep your reputation high. And I think they're both selfish acts in a different way.
Yeah, I think I could agree with that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't think about your reputation. Let's just make sure that's crystal clear, right? And so,
there's a middle ground.
Exactly, but at the same time, when you care so much about your reputation, just like I said, we were saying before, sometimes that ends up, if you do fixate yourself to the North Star of Christ, the North Star of following a path of righteousness, you may end up in a dark, lonely place. I mean, Joseph did that, and he ended up in a dark, lonely place, and it stinks. You may be ostracized at school. You may not be included in functions at work. You may not be invited to a party. You may not be included in some gathering. And so that's tough. And so, but if you genuinely, and you've got to deal with that, but if you genuinely follow and anchor yourself to that North Star, you will have comfort in your conviction, right? To stay with Christ at your side. He will be there for you. But that doesn't mean I won't be lonely and dark for a long time. Joseph was in jail for a long time.
Yeah. And I think you were talking earlier about how God gives us like tools to use. And I think reputation is one of those tools. It's more of a quick check of what you're doing right and wrong. And I think that if you use your reputation or thinking about your reputation in the right way, and you put that into perspective and behind the lens of, fixating on Christ, like it doesn't have to be a bad thing to
no, I
to
mean,
think
and
about.
I would actually not even use the word reputation anymore. I'd use the word credibility, right? Because I think that's what counts.
Yeah.
Credibility.
Yeah.
If you have credibility, you have everything.
Of course, yeah.
And I think that is probably that's the thing that we should all strive for.
So what would you say would be the difference between reputation and credibility? Like, why make that distinction?
I think reputation could cover lots of different things, right? Reputation could be a function of let's think about this one. So we're going to do some editing here. If we use if we take the word reputation and it I guess it's reputable, right? And reputable and credible are similar. But reputation could also fall under reputation of always dressing well, looking good. Reputation could be a character reputation on reputation of certain behavior, reputation of drinking too much, reputation of drug use, reputation in misconduct, and so it's very, very broad. Credibility is in the things you do and the things you say, right? And I think at the end of the day, who you are is what you do and what you say.
Like, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Thank you.
I would agree with you. I think reputation is not just like, it can just be anything. It can literally be anything.
Yeah.
Whereas credibility, like you said, is what you do, what you say. I think there's actually it's more concrete. And I think your reputation in front of different groups is based on different things that those groups prioritize.
Right. Fair point.
So
that's a great observation.
So like, as I'm 19 years old, so I interact with people who are very young, people who are very old. My reputation.
Am I the very young or the very old?
Whatever you like to think. When I deal with people who are, in their senior years, what they prioritize under reputation is you're good. Yeah, you're good. Do you want water or anything?
I'm good.
Okay. Like, when I interact with people who are senior citizens, or they're older, at church and stuff, they prioritize different things. A big thing is my hair, or how I dress and stuff. So that changes a little bit of the perception on me versus people my age who wouldn't look at my hair as something that it would change a little bit, or people who are younger than me who are like, no, that's cool. That's like a reputation thing where it's it's very fluid, it's very dynamic. There's no really concreteness to it. I think that's where the danger of it is is the fact that it's ever so changing, and in front of different people you have to put on different faces if you follow your reputation. You put on different faces and do all these different things, and all of a sudden you're living a 12-person life, and you're holding up all these different lies and stuff like that just because you want to keep a good reputation.
Actually, you made a really great point, is that reputation when you're in your teens and in your 20s and in your 30s, 40s, like it could fluctuate.
Yeah.
In what you want to focus on, but credibility generally doesn't.
No.
At all, actually. Credibility is this single constant. So it's a great observation. I think I'm going to use that.
Yeah, because the thing about credibility is that it's just more concrete. People know when you say credibility, like they know what you mean, and it's also the repercussions of being not credible across every single group of people are the same.
Mm-hmm.
Every single person, when they see it, someone who's not credible, whatever they say, like someone who just lies a lot about everything, someone who wants to act like they know everything, so they just lie about stuff they don't know. People look at that and just go across the board and go, I don't like that. Whereas if I have a certain opinion on a certain subject, my reputation among different groups of people is completely different. Like I used the example about, I had an episode about Halloween 2 years ago when I first started, and I was a little bit
spooked. Sorry, couldn't help myself.
I had some very strong opinions about it. So, my reputation at my school after that episode released wasn't very positive.
Right.
My reputation in front of, my friends' parents at church was very positive. So if I follow my reputation, what am I going to end up doing?
Yeah.
I'm going to split myself into two different types of people. And I'm going to live this double life or triple life or quadruple life or however many lives you're going to live. Whereas at the end of the day...
It's like a living Halloween costume.
Exactly. I mean, you're right. Whereas, if I focus on the credibility of what I say and backing it up with real information, even the people who disagree with me or people who think, oh, you're crazy for saying that, or like, what's wrong with Halloween or whatever, they still respect the fact that, no, you went out, you did your research, you put the effort in, right? And obviously that's all comes from God, but I think the credibility is a lot more concrete than the reputation would be. So that's really all I have when it comes to this subject. But there's one more thing I would like to talk about, which is the differences between when you were growing up versus now, when it comes to the issues that youth deal with.
Well, back in the olden days, no, I think we did touch upon that quickly earlier. I think the issues in the world and in society and the struggles, I don't think anything has changed at all. But what has changed is the being attacked on all fronts. That's number one. That in the past, access to inappropriateness, for example, was difficult. Now it's easy. It's at your fingertips. But also, I think because our views of the world are at our fingertips, in front of us, on a phone and on a screen like this, it's very individualized, and algorithms can make things individualized really quick. So your specific, unique temptation that only you know, that's kind of in secret, could be at your fingertips, and an algorithm can bring it to you really darn quick, and regardless of what it is, right? It could be bodily temptation. It could be food during fasting periods, whatever. It could be anything, right? It could be ego related. It could be pride. These things can right at your fingertips be exposed to you without you even realizing it, and kind of flashed before your eyes all the time, 24/7, whenever you want.
Yeah.
And so even forget whenever you want, even when you don't want, you're reading an email, you're trying to plan a vacation, you're doing whatever, there'll be an ad that pops up that's just made especially for you. And that's the beauty of algorithms, right? But I think that is something that just did not happen, in when I was growing up.
I will agree. However, I will disagree with the first point you made, and I'll tell you why. How nothing has changed. The issues haven't changed. I think that the underlying motives and desires have not changed. I'll agree. I think I like to put them in three categories. I know there's like the 7 deadly sins. I like to kind of consolidate them to 3,
Mm-hmm.
but it has to do with ego, or like pride, lust, and then was it pride, lust? I forgot what the third one was, but it'll come back to me. And those things, those main categories don't change, and those main desires that kind of just seep into our humanity without us ever, losing any innocence or losing any ability to, shield ourselves. It's not us going out to getting it, but it comes to us.
Right.
Those don't change. But what I will say is that I think the issues of today's world change, dynamically, and so it's how those
Like
underlying.
what? Give me an example.
So it's like how those underlying motives kind of represent themselves. So an example of that, I would say, would be when it comes to identity, the specific types. I would say, go 200 years in the past, 100 years in the past. What would you identify with? Like, wasn't really, it was a problem, but it wasn't really like a major thing of the society. Whereas now it's, there's identity issues with the LGBTQ community, with the color of your skin, which is probably a thing larger than even is now 200 years ago, or what religion you are, all these things. So I think it's the big buckets are the same, but the smaller what is priority in today's world kind of changes, and I think that kind of changes the dynamic of the issues. But like it says in the gospel, like Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Same thing with our temptations. They're the same yesterday, today, and forever. But it's, I think, the vehicles of which those temptations, like you mentioned about like the algorithms and the ads, the vehicle of which those temptations come, and the things that we can do with those temptations, I think change. And I think as time goes on, I think like now lust is, like you mentioned, way easier to access and to do.
And succumb to, right?
Of course, than it was 50 years ago when you had to go, to like a store and go like a comic book store and like go look for it yourself. That's just what I've heard. I've never was alive back then.
Comic book store, but go on.
Same thing. But like, there's differences,
Right, but the methods that were attacked.
Of course,
right.
Of
I
course.
think that's what's changed, and
Yeah.
that's what makes things more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yes. So certainly don't want to minimize that, and I think that is the thing that I pray most about for the youth. Not that they're overcoming some temptation because it's the same as always, but they're just being attacked from all angles, and that's something I feel sorry and sad and pray for them, that God is just by their side, giving them strength, because that is not easy.
Yeah.
And then when you choose, let's say, a path of righteousness, that in the past, if you did that, 3 people or 4 people, there's, when I was in middle school, I would walk home with a group of friends, and at one point, somebody had a joint, and so they all started kind of. It was about 6 of us, and so they all kind of started sharing that, and I just kind of walked a little bit faster, a little bit like when they stopped, I just kept on walking, and so 5 people participated and I didn't. Right. At the end of that whole thing, right, there are 6 people that knew that story, right? I've never even really shared that story. So 6 people knew about that. I think if that were to happen today,
At least 1,000
right,
within the same day.
Yeah. Right. And so now with those 6, maybe 3 of them came to me and said, hey, they were worried that I would judge them. And 3 probably turned around and were like, Labib, you're such a such a dweeb. Like, why don't you loosen up or whatever? But I think today that, and so I didn't care. My point is I didn't care. I think today, if that happened, like you said, 1,000 people would know. Everyone in my high school or middle school would know. Very few people would think that was a cool thing to do. Most people would think that what I did was a cool thing to do. Most people would think that I was a loser for doing that. And I would have probably had, weeks and weeks of repercussions that I didn't have to deal with. And I think that creates tremendous stress and tremendous anxiety for a 12, 13, 14-year-old. That shouldn't be happening. And I think that is... So I guess I'll somewhat agree with you in that it introduces a whole new realm of attack on a persona that never really happened before.
So what would be your advice to those 12, 13, 14, high school, college-aged kids when dealing with this heightened attack? What would you tell them, if one of your Sunday school kids came up to you and said, "Hey, I'm struggling with this, like, what in the world do I do?"
I'm probably, I don't want to say I'm less concerned with college. I mean, college brings its own set of
course,
right? But I think it starts with middle school, elementary school.
Well, I think nowadays it starts with the pre-K.
Yeah. I think I wanna, try not to address my own parenting style because of course I'm going to believe in my own kind of decisions, mine and Sherry's.
I mean, I hope you agree with what you do.
Yeah. But kids didn't have social media until like they were like seniors in high school. And it was, and I think if you don't know what's happening and you walk your path, and at 12 years old and 13 years old, it's probably a safer place to be. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's okay if you're the only one that doesn't have. It's okay.
But it's hard to rationalize that to a 12, 13
It is. Yeah. It is. But I know that when, at least in our example, that when they were older and they did have it, they were like, yeah, we get it.
Of course. Yeah.
Like they totally understood why.
I mean, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, and even for a 19-year-old, which is good to know. But I think that's one avenue. We want to teach our kids confidence in who they are, confidence to be able to walk a path. And that confidence, when you try to bring it to an 11, 12, and 13-year-old, that is honestly one of the biggest gifts you can give them. But unfortunately, some people conflate confidence and arrogance. Yeah.
And what I think the easiest way, as I'm not a parent, but what I've seen, the easiest way for parents to instill that confidence is very simple. It's by living the life of the church. Because the church is confident. The church, especially the Coptic Church, Orthodox means straight path. Like, it is the straight path. It is concrete. It does not change. It is immovable. Like we say, like in our a very common hymn, "O King of Peace," the second verse, we say, "Disperse the enemies that the church may not be shaken forever." The church is not it's not movable. It's not shakeable.
Right. I like that. Replace that word with "me," that I may not be
exactly
shaken, right.
And so I think that by instilling that into your kids, or even into yourself, by I will live that life. And that's how you stay away from the arrogance, because the arrogance comes from it's my own ability. But if you put in this person, like, the church is your haven, God is your rock, that is where you are able to have that real confidence in who you are and who God is.
And that stays with you forever. So
of course.
It's not like, okay, now that I graduated college, I'm free. No, not at all. Now that I'm married, I'm free. No, not at all. Now that I have kids, no, not at all. Now that my kids are grown up, no. Like, you are constantly going to be bombarded with that confidence, arrogance dilemma. And so if you're able to instill that in yourself or in your children at a young age, and build up that line, then I think it goes really good.
Yeah, that's all I have. else you wanted to say?
No? Just persevere. It's great that you're doing this.
Thank
You're touching a lot of lives, and I'm very confident you have a lot more interesting guests than myself.
I wouldn't say all that. I wouldn't say all that.
But best of luck to you. God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Labib, for coming on to the podcast. Sorry. Thank you for coming on. Thank you, Labib, for coming on to the podcast. And thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications. And see you guys next time. Thank you.